It's Tuesday. That means it's Twitter Tuesday, a mailbag episode here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Maybe a little bit of therapy, which I think we could all use after the Vikings stress us out and raise our blood pressure week in and week out. Come take a seat, relax, sip some tea, and join me here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Ooh-wee!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at LukeBraunNFL, and you can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Today on the show, it is Twitter Tuesday. We are taking your questions and trying to work in whatever current events are going on while we do that. First question comes from Waka Waka. By the way, if you have any questions you want to submit to me, you can do so anytime at Luke Braun NFL or at Locked On Vikings on Twitter. Just send me a message or whatever. You can also send an email to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. A couple people were emailing me like throughout the game, which was pretty neat. Thanks for doing that. And also you can put a question. There's a Google form if you have something more long form or you would just rather do it that way. There's a Google form in the show notes you can fill out anytime. So the first one comes from Waka Waka, who asked, was Kirk forcing it downfield too much yesterday? Seemed like he was throwing it into double coverage more than he usually does. So I have my opinion on this, although subject to change once I see the tape. But this has been an interesting talker around TCO Performance Center. So after the game, somebody asked Kirk Cousins, hey, you were a lot more aggressive, what's up with that? And he actually said there were 6 passes that he kind of wishes he had back and they worked out, but they were maybe too risky, which is really interesting because the whole thing has been yay, the Vikings are aggressive. Look at they're winning games. They're beating probable playoff teams. That's great. And Kirk going, well, maybe I don't like it so much. Somebody then asked Zimmer and said, in particular, the one that Kirk said he didn't like, he pointed one out that was the catch that Thielen made on the sideline in the very last drive, the one that looked like Rasul Douglas was going to jump it and pick it off. And then Adam Thielen caught it and it actually then turned around and ran further down the sideline. Thielen's explanation of that one was really interesting. He kind of said because that route ran a couple yards past the sticks, past the first down marker, Rasul Douglas turned around at the first down marker. So he turned around early and that gave Kirk Cousins the room. And then Kirk Cousins threw it inside really well. Kirk Cousins, when asked about this, was like, well, that was a bad idea. Kind of wish I had that one back, but I guess it worked out. So I don't really know what to make of that. And then somebody asked Zimmer and said, Kirk Cousins said that he kind of wishes he had some of these aggressive throws back. What do you think about that? And Zimmer has said, no, I want him to be aggressive. I have told him, I know those could have been interceptions. I'm okay with it. If it gets tipped, if it gets picked, that's life, but you've got to be aggressive. So it's this interesting reverse. And this is the theory that I've had for a long time. And I've said it a lot on this show that I don't think Zimmer is in anyone's ear telling them to be conservative. If anything, he might be saying, hey, please be aggressive. Chad Graff, I think, or maybe it was John Krasinski, wrote an article at The Athletic about all this and kind of remember when Mike Zimmer said that he really liked that Case Keenum had big balls and he liked the aggressiveness there? I think Mike Zimmer wants the quarterback to be aggressive and the quarterback isn't being aggressive. And that's a coaching point he's trying to work into him. And, it's really, really difficult because I think Kirk Cousins has always been a little reticent to throw those riskier passes, except when he isn't reticent to throw those riskier passes. And at that point, then he will do so. And then he'll throw a bunch of picks and then he'll get a bit shyer about it. And that's the cycle of Kirk Cousins. But this whole thing is very interesting because you're getting this vibe of Kirk Cousins is really shy about it and Zimmer is trying to encourage him, which runs very counter to a lot of the narratives we had earlier in the season where we had this dictator strong arming that we must run the ball for 2 yards every play. No, Mike Zimmer's please be aggressive, take your shots, take your passes. Really interesting stuff. For my money, he probably could have dialed it back a little, but I wouldn't even want to give him that coaching point and give him something that would turn him into the conservative version of Kirk Cousins we saw against Dallas again. There were a couple of throws that were probably ill-advised, but again, I reserve the right to take that back on the tape, and I'd much rather him be a little too aggressive right now than much too conservative, which is what he's been before. Let's at least push it till it punishes us, right? Nate from Houston asks, going into the season, you discussed the use of the tight front formations on the defensive line. How would you evaluate the use of this formation? Is it still being used? How have the injuries to Michael Pierce and Danielle Hunter, the trade of Stephen Weatherly, the addition of Everson Griffin, and all the flux of the D-line affected the use of the tight front? So they have definitely used some of these like odd fronts, and they're not odd fronts by the like definition of it, but they have used some stranger looks. I think with Michael Pierce out, they've gone a little bit back toward the classic Zimmer, the Griffin, spread everything out, spread out the ends, mug the A gaps on third down, all of that stuff. They've been doing a lot more of that. And it's been working okay, but they haven't been able to do quite as many varied front things, but they're still doing a really good job disguising their front. I do think as you point out, I think the injury to Michael Pierce was the big one. Without Michael Pierce, they're just kind of having Dalvin Tomlinson play regular 3 technique, and then they got James Lynch and Armand Watts kind of playing nose as a rotation until they get Michael Pierce back. And then maybe they can go to some of the weirder stuff again. But yeah, I think the injuries have sort of made that plan a little bit less fun. But they've also done stuff like swing Sheldon Richardson out to edge rusher, which is kind of wild. Connor says, do you believe, regardless of how the season ends, that there should still be a change? Feels as though wins like these might put the team into a false sense of security when a change might be better in terms of future success. I hear you. I'm sympathetic to that. A lot of people really fear this scenario where the Vikings sneak into the playoffs as the 7th seed, and then they get blown out in the wild card round, and then they go, but we made the playoffs, and they run everything back, right? And we get another year of 8 wins and mediocrity. And people really fear this scenario. I don't think that that's what would happen in that scenario. I think if they just barely sneak into the playoffs and it's very clear that they don't deserve to be there, they're not going to accidentally think of themselves as like a true deserving playoff team if they aren't one. Now, if they get into the playoffs as the 7th seed, they upset a 2 seed, they get really close to beating the 1 seed in the second round, and then, maybe they felt like they could have had a run. If they feel like they deserve to be in the playoffs, and it's a long season, the problems from September would be long behind them at that point. They probably would be going into the playoffs pretty hot. If they're sitting there headed into the wild card round of the playoffs thinking, we can win this, and if they really, really believe that, then I do think they run it back. Maybe that's not a good idea. But I don't know. I think if you are sitting there in the playoffs, in the postseason, feeling like you can make a run, then it's a lot more difficult for me to kind of say, clear everything out. If you're going in and you're like one of those Texans teams that just sort of dissolved right away, whatever, right? There's a difference in these, and we can sort of make a gut call, a judgment call on this when we're actually there, if we actually get there. The way I see the Wilfs doing it, that's the way I would do it. The way I see the Wilfs doing it is, if they make the playoffs, they're keeping people, and if they don't, they aren't. But look, you got to make the playoffs before you can win in the playoffs. You got to win in the playoffs before you can get to the Super Bowl. You got to get to the Super Bowl before you can win the Super Bowl. So, 1 week at a time, 1 game at a time, right? Scoliosis asks, this is one from last week, by the way, because I thought Clint Kubiak had a decent game, but he asked, if Mike fires Clint, would Gary be well within his rights to demand that Adam also be fired? All is fair in love and war. This is a key component of Hammurabi's code. Eye for an eye, son for a son. I don't think Mike Zimmer would fire Clint Kubiak just because I don't think there's anybody else in that offensive staff that can do a better job. And I think a big problem with the offense was that they had kind of samey, homogenous things installed. Somebody else can't sequence bad play designs and bad install better. They just kind of had bad install. Now they have fixed some things, and they have, I think, gone to better concepts that they had installed, and I think they've tweaked a lot. And of course, just getting the quarterback to be more aggressive makes the same play calls look better. So I don't think Mike Zimmer will fire Clint Kubiak. I think everybody's either gone at the end of the season or everybody isn't gone at the end of the season. I don't think we're going to do any of these mid-season big-time tweaks. Once again, thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. The next question in this Twitter Tuesday mailbag comes from Mark SD, who says, has Clint Kubiak showed signs of improvement in the last 2 wins, or do we still have a mismatch when it's him versus the opposing defensive coordinator? So he has called very good games in the last couple. I will give him credit for the last 2, but for me, I need a bigger sample than that. You did a couple good games, great. You did a couple horrendous games the weeks before. Maybe those even out, and I didn't love the play calling for a lot of the first part of the season. So the like pre-bye part of the season. So I need to see more before Clint has proven himself to me. So I would still say, mismatch, and he's probably going to be outmatched more often than he isn't because he's still young and all that stuff. But we can have that take. We don't have to undo that take to also appreciate, yeah, but he did well in the last couple games, and that's nice, and I hope it continues. George asks, was there anything different that the O-line did in this game? It seemed like there were less holding penalties in a somewhat decent game from the line. So, yeah, the holding penalties, what I noticed with Oli Udo, at least live, and I'll watch the tape and confirm this, but Oli Udo doesn't get out of his stance quickly enough in the run game. That's a thing that I've kind of had with him. And when he's late to that, when he's late to the second level, or he's late to like a defensive lineman, he had a nasty habit of holding in a way that I think he used to be able to get away with a little more in college. And he's in that situation at guard more often than he is at tackle. So it's like exacerbated. And that's why he had the bad habit of holding. If you get beat a little bit, usually you can get away with a little bit of a hold, and there's such a scrum of bodies that you have a decent chance of the ref just not seeing it. But Udo was getting caught a lot, and it seemed like he would just get beat now. So he's still too slow off the line, and like in run blocking, he let a lot of guys into the backfield, and that was rough. But he wasn't holding, so it was a 2-yard loss instead of a 10-yard loss, and that's an improvement, I guess. But you still got to get him out of that stance faster. That's how you really unlock him into like a good lineman. Ryder Jensen asks, why do a lot of Vikings fans think the Vikings are the only team with O-line problems? What they're complaining about is the same problem every team in the NFL has. NFL D linemen are scary people and hard to block. I think the Vikings have an above average line with either center. Ooh, above average is probably too aggressive for me, but I hear what you're saying here. Yeah, O-lines are bad in the NFL compared to D-lines, and that's just a trickle-up thing because D-lines make more money, and high schoolers know that now, and we are getting to a point where the O-linemen and D-linemen coming into the league knew that when they were in high school and deciding whether or not they were going to be O-linemen and D-line. Big high school kids are going to choose to be D-linemen. Really, really athletic kids are going to choose to be D-linemen and get that training a little better. So the whole kind of farm system of the United States is just pumping out more D-linemen than O-linemen. So that has sort of fueled a lot of the strategies, a lot of the zone blocking stuff we see in the NFL. And then generally, yeah, just a disparity between D-line and O-line talent in the NFL. So yeah, that's totally true. It's not unique to the Vikings, though. I'm super sympathetic to Vikings fans because we've been dealing with this since Matt Khalil. I mean, it's been 10 years. And so I get people being frustrated with watching the Vikings lose games for the same reason over and over and over and over again and be kind of incapable of fixing that problem. Skull Actuary says, this is a question we ask every week, but why can't the defense hold firm when we know the opposing offense needs a touchdown? They got choke in them, man. A lot of times you say, oh, well, they're running like softer defenses and that's the problem or something like that, but they're not. They're running the same coverages that they run in, it's the second quarter on a, 2nd and 7. They just got choke in them. They just kind of screw the pooch. There is something too. So when you're in man coverage as a corner, and they need a touchdown, you're going to favor the deep route a lot more. You're going to play a little more off. You're going to play a little softer, and then you let a 12-yard completion in front of you, and they can kind of dink that down the field. But there is some degree of that. But like the Marquez Valdez-Scantling touchdown in this game was just Xavier Woods doing the bad football. He just played football bad. And he gave up a big touchdown. He was in man coverage. He widened out way too much. He let the guy cross his face. He did not play that coverage properly at all. And it turned into a 75-yard touchdown. That could have happened in the first quarter too. It was just a mistake at a bad time. And I think they just got choke in him. Kraken Leafs asks, who would the Vikings be most likely to tread a Taysom Hill? They believe in somebody who hasn't shown so heavily they will give him a wildly unexpected contract. So I took this in two ways. There's the way you describe it, where it's like a person who just kind of seems like they don't deserve a contract to get a big contract. That is probably Garrett Bradbury. I think the Vikings have a higher opinion of Garrett Bradbury than most fans do. Even though he kind of got halfway benched in this game, they could still kind of point to like, well, it was just COVID recovery, and he might even start in the next game against San Francisco. We'll kind of see how it goes as we go for practice if Mason Cole still takes first team reps now that Bradbury's like fully recovered. Or has had more time to fully recover. But I also take this in the way, like Taysom Hill got that contract. I talked at length about it with Ross Jackson on Locked On NFL, which I host with him on Tuesdays. He's Locked On Saints, so he knows this intimately. And that contract, a lot of the reason he got the money he did is because of the versatility there, because he replaces a lot of otherwise possibly expensive spots on your roster, like backup quarterback. He can play tight end. He can be a wide receiver and stuff like that. Wide receiver 3, tight end 2, and quarterback 2. Add those all up, and it actually starts to look a little bit more reasonable if you're paying for all 3 of those positions in one guy. So it's like, okay, so who is that guy for the Vikings? I'm going to say Kene Wangwu. If he is a kick returner or running back, and he can also do some punt things, or somebody really wacky like Dan Chisena, just to get like a random like 4-year Matthew Slater type deal for being a really good punt gunner, which, by the way, he has been all over the field this year as a special teamer. He has improved mightily. So maybe somebody like that. I have a few more questions that I want to get to. But first, I want to talk to you about Grambling. I don't know if y'all saw the Monday night game between the Bucs and Giants. Pretty boring game. But one riveting way to make any Tom Brady game like watchable, even if it's against a terrible team, is to bet on Tom Brady over a half-yard rushing. It's a prop in every Brady game because he loves to QB sneak, and you'll suddenly find yourself rooting for specifically 4th and 1s so he can sneak. Now, in this game, Brady actually had a legit scramble, so he covered it that way, and I won the bet. But if you want to make any prop bets like that, you can head on down to betonline.ag. It is your one-stop shop for all things Grambling. You can bet on college and pro football, basketball, baseball, UFC, even your favorite Vegas casino games. And if you enter promo code LOCKEDON when you sign up, LOCKEDON, all one word, you get a 50% welcome bonus. That means whatever your direct deposit is, BetOnline will match half of that in free play money just for entering the promo code LOCKEDON at betonline.ag, where the game starts. All right, trucking through home stretch of this mailbag. Goggles says, I wasn't able to watch the game on Sunday, but I am all the way back in on Zim, Kirk, and the Vikings as a whole. Is this sustainable, or do we need to break out the shotgun? The ever-famous optimism shotgun. Look, find your fun. That's what I always say. If being optimistic about the Vikings and believing in them makes you happy for a while, you can think about the Vikings and enjoy yourself. Do that. And yeah, they'll maybe disappoint you later, but at least you had fun now. But yeah, I mean, they're the Vikings. They're going to destroy you. It's just how this works. Austin Pelkey asks, assuming we still move on from Zimmer at the end of the season, do we still need to blow up the roster? I think at least the last couple of games have shown that this roster is capable of competing with top teams in the NFL, given more aggressive philosophy to play under. So I think the shape of the roster is what makes it kind of, yeah, it's going to blow up whether it's a new guy or not. You've got Anthony Barr, looks like he's definitely not the guy he was, and he could be gone at the end of this year. You could let Danielle Hunter go at the end of this year, although I think any new head coach would come in and just choose to keep him and build whatever he's going to build around a guy like Danielle Hunter. So you don't have to let him go, but like, in a year or two after you've kind of gone through the rebuilding growing pains, what do you got left in Harrison Smith or Adam Thielen, those guys? And so maybe you want to blow that stuff up. But then otherwise, what's the core of the team? Justin Jefferson, he's on a rookie contract. He'll stay. Brian O'Neill at right tackle, he just signed a huge deal. You can't really get rid of him even if you want to do somebody like Dalvin Cook. You kind of still keep him around. You kind of have to. So I think those decisions kind of, in a way, make themselves for a theoretical new regime coming in to run things. And a lot of the blowing up of the roster that I always talk about is like guys that kind of are on their way out anyways that will need to be replaced. And if you're bringing in a new coach, he's going to want to replace those guys with like his own people. Easy Cheese Wizard asks, with a team trying its best to kill its entire fan base via Sunday heart attacks, is it a better option to just watch only the first half of games and tune out at the 2-minute mark? I don't know how much more of this my heart can take before it explodes. I would recommend the opposite. Because a big reason that you are so invested is because you spent the other 58 minutes on this whole roller coaster where you're like, wow, they look so good, they're going to win this game. And then the 2-minute debacle at halftime happens and you're like, oh no, here we go again. And then, they score again and you're like, maybe they brought it back, and then they collapse again. And you're exhausted from this roller coaster. I say, just tune in for the last 2 minutes. You don't have any of that context. You know that it's going to come down to the last play. That's a guarantee. The Vikings have guaranteed that to us. So if you just come in for the last couple minutes, see how things play out there, you don't have as much of the prior investment, and you can keep yourself at a nice, safe emotional distance, but you still get to see the exciting part of the end of the game, which is what we all watch for. James CA asks, any thoughts on that god-awful fullback sweep? I legit have never seen a team run this, and of course it backfired. So You probably have seen a team run this because I'm pretty sure somebody's run this against the Vikings and converted. It wasn't the Ravens game where they did a ton of stuff to their fullback, but I believe like not that long ago, somebody did a fullback toss and converted. It's supposed to be a subversive thing, right? It's supposed to see they'll never see this coming. And like, yeah, I don't think you would see it coming much, but obviously it didn't work. And asking a slow player to get out to the edge on a sweep play is an overthought thing. And I think that's a pitfall of a young coordinator, that they can kind of outthink themselves sometimes and really, really get caught up in the moment and actually convince themselves that this is so subversive that it's going to work, even though it doesn't make any sense. It's just a thing that happens to young coordinators. And it's a problem with going into the season with Clint. Throw it on the pile. Troy MCC says, do you have any information or hypotheses on why Kene isn't getting any snaps on offense? I would think that the offensive staff would want to get someone with his speed on the field. So my best guess goes back to his draft evaluation when he was at Iowa State. He was not great at reading the gaps. He wasn't. His eyes weren't very good. And I thought he looked better at that in camp, but camp is not a great indicator of a player's eyes because you're not really tackling, you're not really going 100%. So making those reads can only be so good of a simulation. Preseason would have been great, but he was hurt during preseason, so we never really got to see if that skill has developed. My guess would be that it isn't, and that's why. But I mean, as a kick return develops a lot slower than a run play where the gaps are open and closed like bang bang. A kick return is a lot slower, and you can kind of develop the lanes a lot quicker. That's why that was the thing Cordero Patterson was always good at. Well before, he couldn't do punts. Punts developed too fast for him by his own admission. He said this once. And that's why it took him so long to become, it took Cordero Patterson 6 years to learn running back. And not that that's the fate of Kene Nwangwu by any means, because Kene Nwangwu has more experience than, Cordero Patterson never played running back. I wouldn't be surprised to learn that Nwangwu needed a lot of time to get more comfortable with the reflexive kind of muscle memory instinct. It really has to be a gut call, and you just have to feel it. You can't really make that decision in your head. You have to make it in your gut. And I just wouldn't be surprised to learn that Wang was still working on that. Connor Keach asks, is Armin Watts actually good? It sure seems like it. He's had a nice year. He's had a nice year as a rotational guy. I think if you start giving him more snaps and turn him into more than a rotational guy, that job gets harder, and you'd have to see how he holds up to that. But as a rotational guy, yeah, I think he's had a pretty solid year, which is nice. He was kind of a big struggle guy last year, and he struggled a lot in camp and preseason sometimes too. He was really up and down in camp and preseason. I was kind of worried about that, but especially against the Packers, he had a hell of a day. So yeah, it's working out nicely. If his snap count increases, I'd be open to trying that. Arlo asks, how much better is the secondary with Bynum over Woods? Is Harrison Smith still an elite safety? Strictly, what does the tape say? So the tape with Woods back in this, Woods had a terrible game against the Packers, and Bynum came off a pretty good couple of games, right? So there are a lot of people saying, should we bench Woods for Bynum, blah, blah, blah. Harrison Smith, I have not seen many problems with him at all. He knows what he's doing. He's definitely still the linchpin of the secondary. Wouldn't touch that. But with Bynum versus Xavier Woods, I like Bynum as the future, and then you can just kind of let Woods walk at the end of his 1-year deal here. Woods has had some good games, and then he had this really bad one that's all kind of really fresh in our minds, and that the bitter taste is fresh in our mouths. So I don't want to overreact to that, but we can be on notice, right? But even before looking at the tape, I have every confidence in the world that looking at the tape is going to be damn, that was a real bad Xavier Woods game. But let's wait for it to be more than just the one, because he has played pretty well in other games too. Maurice Morse says, are we good or are we bad? Man, the whole point of Vikings is that you never get to know. They will never let you know that. That's the thesis of them for their entire existence. Gabriel Greco asks, what's your routine, Ben, on last-second field goals? I am a stand-upper. I'm a stand-up. I'm a surrender cobra kind of guy, and then I black out, and I don't know what happens. I have no idea. I think I just hold my breath and prepare to cry. I get stressed, man. I don't know. The last question I'll do today comes from Nick Howard, who asks, what's your favorite Thanksgiving side dish? So in the last couple of years, it has just so happened to work out that I've kind of eschewed or had opportunities to, eschew more traditional Thanksgiving sides and stuff, the stuffing and the the mashed potatoes. So of the traditional ones, I love a good stuffing, right? I love a good sweet potato casserole. That's awesome. I'm going to go with something that my girlfriend and I made last year for Thanksgiving that I'm going to try to do again this year. Drop biscuits that are a family recipe that they were just like good old fashioned drop biscuits. We put a little bit of cheddar and bacon in them, and they were absolutely to die for. It was everything we could do. They came out before everything else, and it was everything we could do not to just fill up on those things before we actually got to like the entire meal. So I'm going to go with those. They were absolutely insane. Tomorrow on the show, we are going to go over some of the tapes. I'll circle back to some of these questions that I had to defer and talk about kind of what I saw from everybody. So I hope you join me for that one. It's usually a deeper football episode, and it's kind of my favorite one of the week. So for your second listen of the day, thanks for making us your first. For your second listen, check out the Locked On Bets podcast, hosted by your boy Q, handicapping expert Lee Sterling. They will get your grambles straight. I'll see y'all tomorrow, and as always, Skol.